Hello. This week we're going to look at continental silver because it's often overlooked here in the UK when it comes to collecting, and it's very interesting, although it is complicated for numerous reasons. And we're going to look at two different spoons. One is in virtually pristine condition and one has been around the houses, but there are historical reasons why one has had such tremendous abuse. But let's start off with the beautiful spoon first. And this is as you can see, when I purchased this was filthy black. So I've cleaned it very gently. This is the original gilding. And you can see by the colour and the tone of it, when you get electroplating, electro gilding, which you will get from the 1840s onwards, because it was a much easier technique to employ, and you could do it on many items at once. Whereas mercury gilding, you had to take time with each individual object. You had to mix up the mercury and gold paste, you had to apply it, you had to fire it off. It was much more labour intensive, but of course it was actually slightly thicker, and it was also a stronger bond to the surface, which is why often pieces of mercury gilding that were done earlier than electroplating and were subject to the same amount of wear have survived. Now this spoon is unmarked, so we have to know something about the style of the spoon and all that sort of thing, but helpfully it's inscribed with Dutch around the edge and the date, which is even for the most simple of us, having a date on something is an enormous help. It's a christening spoon, and it's inscribed Jan Thomas Geboren, which I think means, my Dutch isn't terribly good. I mean, no surprises there. But I think was born on, or is born, on the 17th of February. And February spelt with a W, so you know you're not in England anymore. And then we've got the date. And often this is a place where you will get a date. Hopefully you'll be able to see this, because it's get the date across the rat tail at the back, 1743. Now the surprising thing about this is not a mid-18th century style spoon. The stem of this, which is cast with a female figure, and then it's got this sort of tapered knife edge and these little scrolls and leaves. This is auricular or lobate, which is a style that grew out of mannerism in the 1620s, 1630s. Very popular in Holland. The great exponents of it in the 17th century, of course, were the Van Vianen family. And it appeared on all manner of domestic silver, particularly spoons. Spoons form this auricular or lobate pattern. Now, what's interesting is, even though this is 100 years after this style was introduced, in some provincial centres in Holland, they were still making spoons like this. It was still a popular form. The fashions didn't change very quickly in the provinces, to the extent where I think, even though this is in absolutely lovely condition, you'll see that the definition, if I hold it up there, isn't that great. Now that's not because it's worn, that's because the mould that has been used to cast this stem, the whole stem of this, the bowl is hand raised, but the stem is cast. The whole stem of this is cast from a very old, well-worn pattern. It's gone probably through the hands of various silversmiths who have adapted it and maybe refinished it or retooled it, the modelling, but it's become less and less defined as the decades have progressed. But it's still beautifully made. Lots of handwork, lots of hand finishing. All this decoration here, this zigzaggery or matting, that's all done with an engraving tool afterwards. There will have been some attempt to refine the detail of this when it's cast, because of course you'll get little casting flaws that come off it, and all of those have to be taken off and filed and chiselled by hand. In fact, the fact that you can see that they were using files on this is that this decoration on the back, this notch decoration, that is not casting. That is simply, if you think of that as a plain rat tail, all they've done as they're filing and cleaning is they've made decorative file marks. So a V-shaped mark, a curved mark with a small curved file, and another couple of V-shaped marks, just to make that more decorative, just to lift it. But that was done because they had the tools in their hands that they were using for finishing the detail of the casting. So it's all done for a reason. You would hope that a Dutch spoon of this period might have a maker's mark or a town mark on it. Those are usually only two marks you'll see on provincial Dutch spoons. They did have date letter systems, but honestly, if you find one of these spoons where this stem, this is quite a thick, you can see it's got a good weight to it, a good feel. If this is very light and very thin, and moreover very flat, these spoons were faked, not reproduced, faked at the end of the 19th century in shed loads, which is why people are often quite wary of buying them. But the fakes always have lots and lots of marks on the back of them. They're spurious marks. They are recorded. If you get a book on Dutch hallmarks, it will. There's usually an exclamation mark saying, watch out, this particular mark was one that was reproduced. But with the spoons, they tend to be quite poor quality. And there is another thing about the spoons that isn't so obvious, and this is because they're quite flat. They are made in the 19th century, and the guys that made them, I don't think sort of thought this through, but they're made to sit as a 19th century spoon would. Now, a 19th century spoon sits this way up, doesn't it, on the table with the bowl facing up. So a lot of these fakes, almost all of the fakes that I've seen, when you put them down flat on a table, and we'll move back, they will sit flat. Now watch what happens when I put this one down. It tilts. It tilts that way or that way, but it won't stay flat, because this was made in the 18th, the 17th and 18th century ones were made to lie the other way down. So what happens when we do that? Can you see it? Absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Sits beautifully flush. And also the wear to the tip here, where it touches, where it would have touched, that is the one little bit where the gilding is worn away. Because for 250, 300 years nearly, people have been putting it down on the table that way. And that's something I don't think you'll read in any book. But it's an unwitting thing that the fakers were just used to seeing spoons this way up, so that's how they made them. They made them to sit that way up. They didn't make them to sit this way up. That's useful. I've just worked it out looking at this, so I mean that's something. Now I've cleaned this. The gilding on this is, I mean, this is almost in pristine state. It's amazing, really. It's got a guild or a town or a family, not a family crest, I think, because these are objects. So you've got a flask and you've got some sort of mezzaluna or cutter. So I would imagine that this christening spoon was given to a member of someone who was in a family that was a member of a guild, possibly apothecaries or herbalists or some odd thing. They were often putting guild or town arms on the backs of spoons rather than family coats of arms that we get with English ones. But that's in virtually mint state. Little bits, obviously, little bits of silver coming through after 300 years where the engraving is, because as it's gilt and then engraved, that just breaks that seal. It allows a little bit of wear to get in. There is some discoloration. I have not polished this with silver polish. I think if you get anything with original gilding on, as I did with the, if you remember, the rock crystal mounted flask from a few weeks ago, that was filthy dirty, but all the mounts were gilded. And it just means if you get something like that, just go at it with, you know, hot soapy water and the end of a softened match or a cotton wool bud, and just take off what you can, and then you'll reveal, because remember this was black, you'll reveal the gilding underneath. Go at it straight away with silver polish and you'll end up with a silver spoon, which is not what the maker intended. Not that they rarely survive with this degree of gilding on them. They don't. But that was a fabulous thing. Often when these turn up in auctions over here, they are simply described as continental. This continental spoon, 19th century, whereas this is a lovely Dutch 18th century example. Now that's the one in lovely condition, and that's a joy. And here's one that's also a joy. Well, it is to me, but it's been through the mill. And this is a tablespoon. And when I say it's been through the mill, if you can see the back of it, have you ever seen so many dents on the back of a spoon? What could have caused that? You ask. I hope you ask. Maybe you don't. Revolution. It's a French spoon. Now, French spoons that were made prior to the Glorious Revolution, where everyone had their heads chopped off, as we know, is a bit thin on the ground. There are lots of reasons. You had the 7 Years' War, where huge amounts of French silver in the middle of the 18th century were melted down. And then whatever survived that, this is the hard part, whatever survived that was mostly looted during the Revolution. And large ornamental pieces of silver were either sold, a few of them were sold, most were melted down. It was ready money. But things that could be useful were saved. Now, this is a tablespoon. I love French hallmarks. They've got a lovely system of hallmarks. They, well, at least in Paris, we'll just concentrate with Paris for now, because otherwise we'll be here forever. You get the maker's mark. And this is, and I've looked it up and I've written it down, Jacques Anthium. And I've probably said that wrong. My French, Anthium. And he was working from 1758 and died in 1784. So he missed the worst of it. And then you will get the Paris charge mark. They have a charge and a décharge mark. The charge mark is the promise to pay the tax on the silver, and the décharge mark is struck afterwards to say it has been paid. You also have a date letter. In this case, the charge mark, which is a lovely big script A under a crown with a leafy frond, has been pinch tight, so you can't see it. But the charge mark, which is a rose, because that's struck afterwards and higher up and is a smaller punch, that's very clear. So that means that this will date from, because they had different periods of people who collected fermiers, people who collected the tax on the silver. And when their period ended, when they were moved on and a new fermier came in, these marks could be changed. Not immediately in some cases, but they could be changed. So these are the marks of Jean-Jacques Prévost, and he was a fermier from 1762 to 1768. So even though we can't really see what the date letter is, we can date it pretty firmly between those dates. But the reason I love this spoon is it's got its original coat of arms on the back. And if the French were good at anything, they were very, very good at engraving elaborate coats of arms for their, terribly decadent aristocracy. So in this case, we've got three, I'll put a photograph of this on, we've got sort of three ducks or geese in a shield with rampant lion supporters. But unlike our rampant lions that are very stiff and just stand up and hold the shield. In this case, one is grabbing one side of the shield and the other is creeping round the base of it. It's very animated. Now, what's very special is that this wasn't removed. I mean, remember at the time of the Revolution, all hell was breaking loose. You wanted nothing to do with the royalty and the aristocracy if you wanted to survive. So most of this silver, when it was confiscated or stolen or repatriated, whatever point of view you've got on it, this would be removed straight away. This was a symbol of the old ancient order, and you didn't want anything to do with it. In this case, I think they might have just found it so decorative with the lions and the ducks that they thought, oh, some French woman said, don't take the lions and the ducks off, they're beautiful. But what they have done in a really, the most basic way, not even engraved, but struck with a really crude punch, is whoever, for want of a better word, nicked this off the aristocracy, then stuck their mark on it underneath. Boom! In fact, they overstruck it in a sense, even though it's below and it doesn't go over it. They're putting their mark on it to say, this is ours now, this belongs to the people. And the people weren't terribly good at writing P's and G's. But there we go, P and G. And of course, this stuff, often this mark is not an owner's initial. It may refer to an inn, a tavern, an institution that's confiscated this stuff, because they wouldn't just, have one spoon. They probably, it's France at the height of the sort of royal excess. They probably have had 128 of them, and forks and spoons, smaller spoons and knives to match. So a lot of these would be pressed into national service, if you like. And which is why they're often treated abysmally, and you get all these marks. Now, I suppose you could say, and you could do it, you could take all those marks off, but those are old dents. Those are not modern. They've not been put in the last 100 years. That is use and abuse in the throes of revolution. So I rather like it. It's part of its history. I'll keep it there. Thank you very much. But these things, and also I should say that at this period, the French silver is made to a much higher standard. Now, I think I've said everything I need to say about these two spoons. They're very interesting. They're always described, usually over here, as continental, even though we've got one lovely Dutch provincial spoon and one lovely French Parisian spoon. And even though the hallmarks can be very difficult and you will need specialist books to look them up properly, it's very rewarding if you learn about this area and the sort of all the history you can learn. So I'll put detailed pictures of the marks that you can see here and the crest and the inscription on this on Instagram, so you can all have a look, because my camera work is terrible. But that's just something for this week. Two little bits of continental silver that have turned up and just tell a story of guilds and christenings in Holland, and a much more exciting story of theft and revolution in France. So keep looking, I'll keep looking, and I'll be back here next week with something else, hopefully to amuse you. So good antiques hunting, and goodbye.